I'm just gonna hit the play button, Taryn, and I'll let you run a director commentary, kind of like old school DVD styles.
Right? My first one.
That's great. I'll turn the volume down.
Okay,
What does it look like?
so
This
we're
life we
here at
lead in
this
the future.
onset of our short,
Your
which is
family,
your sort of traditional
your home,
dystopian post-apocalyptic
your place.
montage, that's showing sort of how the media generally shows
The
the
stories
future.
read between
And you
1200
don't
and
quite know where
1300
you are until you
words.
bump out
I
and you
don't want to
realize it's a
see the
student
future you
who's
live
sort of
in through
scrolling on
your
his phone,
words.
and
I want you to
he's a
get a full
teacher who has
360 view of
posed this
20 years in the future.
assignment, which is to write
Your future.
um, write a story about the future in 20 years.
Right?
Um, so the
That
reason
sounds
that we're doing
agnostic,
this
but if
story
that's
is
your jam,
because ASU and the
why'd you
Center for
ask?
Science and the Imagination, they have this climate
World is
fiction
burning.
almanac, and we really, and it's
You
all
know, for the
sort of
visitor
future
who
facing
isn't familiar with
essays
the real
and
Aladdin,
short stories with fellows from around the world that look to this idea of eschewing dystopian futures. How
dystopia,
can we show
the
different
end of the
pictures of the
world.
future? Because unless we actually show these
Here's the
pictures and these
answer,
visions, how are we actually
right?
going to build it? How are we going to get there? So my partner and I,
Doom and
with
gloom
my Sirens
narratives
team, which is sort of a
remove your
creative team at the
agency,
intersection of
makes it easier
science and
to
storytelling, and we've done a
disengage
lot
and
of
lose hope.
sort of science literacy
But the
activism
apocalypse is
for
just
the
one
past
story.
7, 8 years.
What's another?
We pitched them this idea of like, let's take
Door in
these
the driver's
themes of
seat
the
for this
short, I
assignment.
mean, of this
You
book,
can
and
rewrite the
create a short
rules, the
film about it,
laws.
but
Well,
kind of make it
not the
like
laws of
a
physics,
book
but
trailer as well.
pretty much
So
everything
we
else.
created this sort of short
So stop
form scripted
scrolling
scene of
and
this
start
classroom and this
searching.
assignment. And we're about to go into the virtual world, which is called the story web. So we came up with this idea of like, how do we show these story elements that all these authors have
If we
come up
don't tell
with?
stories
And
about the
one of the
world we live
fellows,
in,
Vandana
how can
Singh,
we
she has this
build
beautiful idea of this like
it?
tapestry of
Find your
stories that need to be
guide
connected that show
and
better
come from
futures.
anywhere.
And
We
so we
want
sort
to
of jumped
survive as
off from
humans,
this
as a
idea.
species.
So
We want to thrive.
we were
But
really
we need to
hamstrung by a
change
very
our
low budget.
ways of
And our
living
authors, this
and
is
of
Libya
doing
Bennett,
things
Brenda,
in order to not
she
only
they
survive
were
but
all
to thrive.
shooting remotely on their iPhones or their Android phones, and the
Fungi
quality was
started
bad.
to send
So we
messages
came
to
up with this
us.
sort of
Mycorrhizal
VFX
activity
idea to
organisms
use
started to
AI
send
art
messages. These
to sort
beings,
of create this
they carry
cohesive
information
world
that is
that we go
essential
into.
to
So I
how to
created these
save
concept arts
life on Earth.
in Adobe Firefly. It was an interesting learning experience.
I'd like to share
And I
this
had an
news
ASU grad student
around the world
create
who are
these
feeling
globe visuals
frustrated
in Unreal
or
Engine. And so
pessimistic
we could, as
about
an
climate
audience
change.
member, through the proxy of
That
this actor, of
if
this
human
character,
beings
go to
survive
all
in
these
the
different
past, we
places in
can
the world
survive
and
this
have
time as well.
these sort of pop-up narrations from our
As the other
authors.
planet,
So
I
it
say
was
Tracy
this
had
weird kind
music
of
proposal
hybrid
for new
um,
designs.
adventure to
Below
do,
my
because I
music
was trying to
can be
make these
compelling
interview
logical guidance.
clips look
Bigger models
really
have
ethereal and
psychologists and
fantastical,
workshops,
and then
and the
match with
highest
these
levels
AI art
have
concept
high
pieces that
res
I then
water treatment
upscaled
plants and
and I
cellular
animated in
machinery.
Runway. And so we have little excerpts here from the different stories. And so we're going around the globe
I think
here,
zooming in
and
can save steps you can take.
it was a trip to try
Actually
to make
doing
everything
something
look
kind of shakes
cohesive,
off that
feel
feeling.
beautiful,
Imagine you're doing that and it just
have the
spots
text
time
on
for people.
the screen not sort of be
Okay, so
overwhelming,
which is happening
especially
right
because the
here.
audio
Imagine you're just
from the
doing that.
author's interviews aren't that great, and
Sometimes,
some are very
some
accented.
days, it
But
felt like they were
I
marking
think,
time.
we
With
created
every now and
something that
then, there was a
takes
spark
you on
of
a journey,
something,
and I'm
and the
really happy
games
with
children
sort of
played,
how it's laid out.
pretending
So
to use
this
dirt
is
for
a story
leaves
that
to
takes
power
place in
their
the
tin
Nigerian
rooftop.
Delta, set in the future, but
And
also
yet, the
looks back
future is
at
not
the
written in
activism that's
stone.
happened against
There
the oil
are
companies there.
spaces,
So the
places,
thing about this
there
almanac
are
is it's not
aspects
Pollyanna-esque,
which
and this
have
is
not been
Vandana, who's
filled
my
in
favorite
and
author. She's
cemented
incredible. If you
over.
don't know her
And
work, I
it's in
highly
these
suggest it.
uncertain
And she has
spaces
this
that
beautiful
the
idea of
imagination
like
can thrive.
of finding those spaces that haven't been
You need a
cemented over
network of
by
stories,
capitalism,
stories
by
that talk
by
to each other,
systems
like
already,
patterns
and
on a
that's
weave.
where our imagination
This
can
is why
thrive.
I collect stories
So this
from
is really
all
the
the worlds
heartbeat
to see
of our
if I can
short right
find the
here.
real ones,
Um,
the true
and so
ones,
really
and
ASU,
weave them with
Center for
all
Science
the
and the
other people
Imagination, which is Ed
engaged in
Finn's
this task.
department, they
Weave
gave
them
us pretty
into
much carte
something
blanche
that
here.
can make a different
They had a very
world.
small budget that they got from Climate Works, And we were able basically just to, oh, that shot before, I wish I'd been able to adjust a bit. Was missing a layer. But, you know, and then we come back to reality, and he sort of brought this experience with him, and this is through his POV. And it just sort of encapsulates and empowers this character to not think about his future as a horror show, but as something that he has agency over. And that's something that all these essays and these short stories in the book have in their DNA. And I think it represents it pretty well. So I will answer any questions, because I've never done one of these things before. But yeah, this is my 4th film, so look forward to doing something else aligned in this space.
This is great. How did you credit the AI person? Did you credit it as an AI person or as a VFX person? How did that work?
So we had one artist who did the art behind the animation behind the authors, and he's credited as what did I put? Is what he want. I'm trying to remember exactly what I did. AI artist, video. And then I did all the AI art that was the animated. I should have called it story art as opposed to concept art, because technically it's concept art inspired by the short story pieces. So all those other pieces besides the globe, I created in Firefly and animated in Runway. And so those are sort of part of the montage. So the cool, you know, sort of mycelium and algae feel, and all the other web and story-based images. But it was, yeah, he initially, I only had his handle. I had found him because I think I had showed it to you too, Dre. Jason Silva had new videos that had all this really cool AI generated background. And so I had a friend in the space figure out who the guy, found an article about who that artist was, reached out to him and just was like, I doubt, you know, you would do mine, but do you have any friends who sort of run this diffusion model that could help me out with animating these interview clips so that, you know, they look fantastical and they look cohesive, sort of to the style of the short. And he agreed to do it.
No, that's great. Well,
Yeah.
I remember when you approached me in like October, and I couldn't help out, but unfortunately, because I look at it now, it's like, oh man, I wish I would have been able to help out on this. But reading the script back then and having that in my mind and watching the film, it was really, really great, because I already had an idea of what was going to happen and what you had in mind in terms of incorporating AI and the story as well. And it turned out great. It turned out really, really good. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank you. Now it's just to get it out to more people, both as a standalone short, as well as a calling card for the almanac, because, you know, it's free to download and it has some really important work in it. There's a short story, like flash fiction by Libya Brenda, with called The Robots, Insects, you know, has like 6 titles on it. It is one of the sweetest, most inventive short stories, basically, about AI saving the world, because it develops this, it finds a hack to connect to nature, and it's really interesting.
What's the name of this short story?
It was the robots, insects, other. Hold on, I'm pulling it up.
And it's a flash fiction.
In the almanac.
What's the name of the book next?
So the almanac is.
And the almanac can be downloaded.
Yep. Oh,
that's
perfect.
Great. Amazing.
That's the thing about ASU, is that they've always put everything. It's called Robots and Insects and Languages and Other Living Things.
Amazing. Okay, I'm gonna download that and give it a read.
It's really good. And Vandana Singh's Mina's Dream is just beautiful. I mean, it's so tangible. Like, I want a VR experience of it. I actually want to do a VR experience of this whole like story web thing. So we had like tried to do a good contract on this so that in case people reached out to ASU to do sort of an extended version of this, that obviously because it was all of our idea at the beginning, that we have some IP in there, IP assets in there.
So how did you end up getting involved with this? I've talked to Ed Finn briefly.
Yeah.
We just met and chatted, but I think I found him through Julian. How are you involved with this?
I reached out to him we did an event with him, an online event with him a couple of years ago, 2021, right around COP. And I'd gotten really frustrated that Hollywood wasn't doing anything climate fiction wise. They weren't utilizing any of the platforms to start this discussion about better futures and climate futures. And so I've always been a big fan of the ASU anthologies. And I had this idea to do readings of like excerpts from positive climate futures, short stories, like from Andrew Hudson and stuff. And so I reached out to Ed and I was like, hey, I'm doing this big event with all these like fancy actors. I didn't have any of it set up. I was literally just like putting my toe in the water. And I'm like, would we be able to license and, read excerpts? Is it okay? Like, can we get the license from you guys? And they're like, we love this idea. We're always trying to get sort of more exposure into Hollywood. So we ended up doing this joint event together. And so I had 6 different readings, so different actors. It was a virtual event because it was still kind of COVID times. Virtual event of 6 different actors reading excerpts. Kim Stanley Robinson gave permission that we read something from Mystery as well. And then we had a short film that somebody did. And then we had a panel with one of their social scientists, gosh, I suddenly forget her name. I apologize. But I'll put the link to the event up here. I'll just have to grab it. And so we had Kate Marvel, who's the climate scientist that the Science and Entertainment Exchange event helped get for us. And we had Vandana, myself, as like a sort of climate STEM filmmaker. And then the social scientist, Ed Finn, talked a little bit sort of before it. But, it was just a really great panel where we just discussed this sort of problem of media proliferation of dystopic and gloom and doom narratives that are just on a feedback loop right now and reinforcing this idea in the public.
Mm-hmm. So did that all precede the Climate Almanac? Or did the Climate Almanac?
This was 2 years ago that we did this event.
Okay. And the Almanac's recent, right? It just launched.
Yeah, on Tuesday. So this short film that you see was launched in concert with the Almanac. So it's like a trailer for it. So it's like a cinematic taste of what the themes are of the book.
Very cool. Huh.
Is there a link for the film? I see. It's Climate Almanac. Is that where it is? No.
Yeah, I can put the link in the.
I got it right here.
Beat you to it. Boom.
You did.
Wow. This is sweet.
I noticed that YouTube put a context notification under your video.
For climate change?
Yeah, United Nations climate change refers to it's
yeah.
What technology is this group most hopeful about with respect to climate change?
Sorry, ask the question again.
What technology are you most hopeful about with respect to dealing with climate change and pulling carbon out of the air?
Yeah, I know that's the thing. I think it's such a systems issue that it's like the technologies and the social change that's created by the storytelling, and the policy that is created by how the cultural change, like it's all so interconnected. So I think that it has to, maybe it's not the most effective technology, but it's going to be that sort of moves the needle, but it needs to be a technology that gets the attention. I was listening to a podcast yesterday where he's a VC guy. I don't know if you guys listen to the Futurists podcast, but he's a VC out of Thailand, but he's American. And he was saying, we need our Pearl, not speaking so much to the technology, but to sort of the social pivot point, but we need like the Pearl Harbor Day, which sucks because that means that, you know, you need the mass destruction day to like move the needle on this. But I think that getting public awareness of something like a carbon capture device would be really cool. Like in one of my sci-fi films, like I have these huge kind of like blimp drones all dotting the sky that are, you know, carbon capture powered by sort of this newfangled superconductor technology. But, you know, at the end of the day, the most important thing is, I think, redoing our electrical grid and finding, something that was really cool was at one of the national labs in Oregon that's partnered with Microsoft, they have, through using Copilot, they found a potential replacement, molecular structure replacement for lithium. So like being able to not have to use rare earth minerals like in conflict zones and, you know, developing countries. I think that would be a huge thing too.
Yeah, apparently they used AI to identify a number of alternative metals to lithium, and which is really interesting to see what comes from that.
Yeah, there's a great video on it, and they were just talking about the scale of it, that it would have taken their teams of scientists 20 years, and it took, you know, a week because of the AI Copilot.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting to think about like who, the system side of it, like whose opinion you have to change. I listen to a lot of climate podcasts, and like I'm privy to certain like emerging technologies that some like the most, you know, like popular podcasters don't necessarily know about, and it's like really interesting to like listen to them sort of like talk over or talk past certain things. And like sometimes like changing, you know, just a few perspectives there could like, you know, have a downstream effect on like a sort of more general conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's like, I mean, you know, there's, you know, people at various, you know, corporations who were buying carbon offsets, right? And then, you know, those are certainly not cool anymore, right? And then, you know, but it's like, you know, trying to convince different people about what matters is really challenging. But
Like, not effective.
Say again.
That carbon offsets are cool, but not effective. Like
not effective, right. Do you do research as well? Like,
actually, like academic research?
Or I mean, just, I mean, I get like, where do you situate yourself in relation to like all of these conversations on a day-to-day basis? Like, are you doing sort of like in the best way, in like the best meaning of the term, like, are you doing climate propaganda like outside of this sort of space, or like, you know, positive propaganda?
Yeah,
or
I try to exist sort of at this intersection of sort of impact filmmaking and like science sci-fi nerdery in a way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I just naturally am hyper curious about how everything works. And I'm a big nature nerd. So I'm just a big social media sharer of, you know, research and papers and cool things that I think there was something about like when I went down the science rabbit hole, when I started writing sci-fi, and I came out the other side and I was like, oh my God, the world is amazing. Why do we not like share and support like how we exist, like just the science and the technology behind how everything works? Like it gave me such an appreciation for this planet, for life, all that stuff, almost in a spiritual way. It was kind of like I was Carl Sagan, and it just sort of became a mission to be able to share it in the most positive, non-preachy way. And I also saw, like when I formed my Sirens group, I really saw I've always been a bit of a futurist, and I saw on the horizon the massive disruptions that were going to happen with climate change and with AI. And so I wrote a post in 2014, and I'm like, listen, we have this coming. The only way that we're going to mediate this and be able to elect policy people that can create policy and law that are going to help us move into this next century, this next epoch, is if we are scientifically literate. And we have no science literacy in our general population anymore. And that has sort of jumped off from watching Bill Nye debate Ken Ham I don't know if you remember that, the Creationist Museum founder, and the support that Ken Ham had on all the socials, my brain exploded. And I was like, no, 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 no. Like we need to move the needle. And the best Trojan horse for science literacy is entertainment. And so I'd already been in this kind of sci-fi, writing world. And I'm like, oh, this is the reason I am, because like, we really need to be able to imbue storytelling with the secret tools that, population needs. So that started it all. And then when the climate disruption crisis came so much sooner than I thought, I really pivoted, and I started realizing, I'm like, you know what? I did this too, writing sci-fi. I produced like a sci-fi dystopic series. I'm like, we can't do this anymore. I'm like, we need to have future worlds that aren't destroyed, where there's one family left. I'm like, we need to see what it feasibly looks like in dealing with the climate crisis and still rising to the occasion and still like having something to look forward to. I always think what William Gibson says, like, nobody invokes the 22nd century. Think in the 20th century, everybody's like, in the 21st century, we're going to do this. Nobody invokes the 22nd century. Everyone's afraid of it.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to take like agency over it again, which is why I wrote the script this way.
That's great.
Yeah, I really like this idea of science fiction as a vehicle for science literacy, because in a way it always has been, seeing a lot of it always has been, with Star Trek directly influencing engineers to create things like cell phones and so on and so forth. But what's happened is that, we've veered down this dystopian sci-fi world to the point where we're just entertained by these disastrous possibilities, that we lost sight of all the wonderful things that science fiction can bring to the table in terms of better understanding just how the world works and the laws of physics and the possibilities within those laws, and hard science fiction. So this is great. I love that. That's a wonderful provocation to really start thinking about how science fiction can work harder to tell new and more interesting and positive stories.
And I think that the first step before the science literacy is the science curiosity, where we don't have this like science siloed, in the science siloed in this like separate academia world. The science is nature, nature is us. We just need to be more curious about how things work and how things are interconnected. I mean, I'm just, big quantum physics entanglement nerd, and sort of from the David Bohm world of like this interconnected implicate explicate order. And it's just, a really beautiful idea that can be at the heart of so much story, that we all are connected, from a technically with the entire universe, if you believe what David Bohm's research said, or theories.
You mentioned systems earlier, and I just think about like Danella Meadows and like sort of making sort of popular primers and things like that. That seems like that science curiosity that you're talking about is it's almost like in advance of science literacy. You just want systems literacy, right? Just like showing that there are so many ways to play, and so many different little nodes that have impacts on the big thing, right? The interconnectedness of it all. Because it's hard to teach 5-year-olds about like hard science, right? But you can show them cause and effect in a way that's really helpful. I've wondered about like alternative science curricula in school, right? Like which examples do you use? How do you talk about carbon dioxide? I've met 11-year-olds who like learn about carbon dioxide for the first time in 6th grade and then suddenly get very sad.
Yeah, I know.
So like, how do you give them something else, right? Like what's the 2-page primer that you give them that doesn't send them home, in a new sort of state of depression?
Right. It's like I know there's like a climate psychologist who's pretty popular right now. I forget what her name is, Britt something, and it's like, you have all these kids now with climate anxiety. But I think a counterpoint to that can be, if you have this curiosity and this understanding of nature, that gives you agency over what's happening. and you're like, oh, I can understand what's happening. And if we can understand that, maybe we can understand how to like make an impact, as opposed to like these, little sound bites of like, oh, just recycle or get an electric vehicle car, just starting from the very, like from a molecular standpoint, and imbuing these kids with, with why it's exciting that they can, like how much we do understand, how much we do know, and then also how much we don't. And that's exciting too, that they can be part of that.
Yeah,
But I'm not an educator.
I'm liking this kind of intersection of like curiosity and systems thinking, because you can hard science fiction will pose these ideas. I go back to the Star Trek technical manual. Julian's told the story many times about being inspired by the communicator. I remember looking through the technical manual for the next generation version of Star Trek, and they break down how the teleportation system works. And they're playing within the laws of physics, beyond what we currently know, but they are trying to root it in some kind of truth. And what I like about this notion is that if you can apply curiosity or critical thinking to something like science fiction, like, well, how might that actually work, and really deconstruct it in your brain, it can be really, really fun. And I love reading like goofs and bloopers on IMDb on different episodes. So perfect example is at Encounter at Stargate, which is the first, or sorry, Encounter at Farpoint, which is the first Next Generation episode. There's a scene where Wesley Crusher is frolicking in the holodeck and falls in the stream and gets wet. And then as he leaves the holodeck, he runs into Captain Picard all soaking wet. And people in that conversation are asking like, well, how did the water leave the holodeck? How did the holographically produced water that got him wet, how did that exit the holodeck? So then there's this like spirited discussion on the technical, like how might this have actually happened? So that's fun, because it creates that discourse on what might have happened, and then you can apply that to systems thinking, which is back to all the various the technologies and the processes and the protocols that would have led to this thing to happen. But yeah, I think there's some immense joy in critiquing science fiction that I think a lot of people, it almost feel like it should be taught. And it becomes more or less in not just media literacy, but like specific forms of media literacy, like how to critique science fiction versus how to critique the news. Similar.
Andrew Maynard does teaches classes sort of along those lines at ASU. If you're not familiar with him, he has a really great Substack as well.
Oh,
he's
great.
sort of a deep dive into generative AI, but yeah, he used to teach a really great sci-fi movie class through an analytical lens, and yeah, he's really cool.
Right. This is
He's a professor.
Future of human, future of being human.
Yeah.
Is it his Substack? Okay, gonna subscribe to that.
Yep. But systems thinking, another, is not taught really or discussed at all. I'm trying to remember who really, maybe it was Otto Scharmer who really got me into systems thinking, and then just did the original like Donatella Meadows book. And but it's just an element, a massive element of climate and our world in general that just gets looked over by academia. Like if I went back to school, that's what I would want to get a degree in.
Right. There's so many people who are looking into like historiography of right-wing politics, right? And everybody's having to sort of like do sort of a reboot on the liberal storytelling of the 20th century because the right is winning, and so like how we actually write history, definitely makes a big difference. And like being able to do systems thinking about that sort of social change, right? And what is it like? There's people now who are like teaching the history of the right because they're trying to understand why we're losing. And so like what's working for somebody else. I mean, obviously, like it's a lot easier to win when you don't have to tell the truth, right? Like that as sort of like a baseline principle. If you don't have to be intellectually honest, like it's a lot easier to make forward progress or backward progress.
I'd written a blog post during 2020 about what I call the fourth act, which is sort of the next act of storytelling, which is like sort of community storytelling, where like the hero's journey has now ended and now we are collectively on this journey together. And what is storytelling looking like if we are a collective society, and the power of that. And I was looking at sort of why the right-wing narrative is so strong, and it's because it's not from my own perspective of being in Hollywood and trying to connect all these different groups that are doing great work sort of in the environmental or science entertainment space, and nobody wants to play with each other. Like nobody wants to support each other. And I was like, we need to create a massive network here, where this is larger than what your donors are telling you that you can and cannot do. And then you look at sort of this one cohesive narrative on the right that everybody supports and everybody is behind. And it's kind of like this like nebulous groundswell of movement. You can see sort of the ringleaders, but everybody is just supporting everybody, where I just saw everything siloed here, especially in Hollywood on the left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, different rules for engagement.
It was just still, proper and polite, and like there was the purpose of it, but then there was also sort of the larger goal wasn't important enough. They still had to sort of be successful and establish themselves, like the Sloan Foundation and Science and Entertainment and all these, like nobody would play with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thanks for offering the commentary and the discussion.